Hi, everybody. As mentioned by Dan, thank you for joining us today. Just our quick standard disclaimer, this presentation is for educational purposes only. It's not legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. That is, of course, unless you're already one of our clients, but the presentation itself does not create an attorney-client relationship. Also, we're going to move through this material today at a fairly good clip just so you can get on with your day. We want to make sure we give you some good basic information and get you kind of in the right place with thinking about leave issues within your business. And we'll try to get through this, as I said, so that you can keep things moving along. If you're already a client, you know how to reach us through our portal. If you're not a client and you're listening and you'd like help with specific information in this area, we'll have some information at the end on how to contact us. So let's start with an overall discussion on leave. Some of this might sound very basic, but it's always good to have a fundamental understanding of a topic and kind of a foundation laid before we get into it. So some of you might be thinking, okay, why is he telling me this? I know this, but I want to just make sure that we're all on the same page with what we're actually talking about today. So leave is generally when an employee is temporarily absent from work, usually with the permission of their employer, and it's for a specified period of time. That's kind of the usual parameters here. We're generally talking more with employee leave. People generally think about a longer amount of time off. They might think about, well, the person has a planned vacation coming up for a week, or the person is going to be on medical time out for a couple weeks. That's the sort of thing that we think about often with leave, but we also today want to touch on a shorter amount of time off by an employee, such as a call out for a single day. So that can come into your leave process as well, and we want to keep that discussion going with this topic today. So what do you want to know about leave planning in general? Well, planning for when your employees are gone is a good way to help keep your business running smoothly. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have some best practices to follow, but we're just again kind of laying the groundwork here. If you're planning for leave, you know, or you want to know what you can prepare for. So if somebody has a scheduled vacation, as we just mentioned, or if somebody has a scheduled surgery coming up, for example, you want to know what you can prepare for so that you can make any changes within your business needed for that. But also part of a leave planning strategy for an employer is you want to be prepared for the unexpected. Maybe an employee gets sick for a short period of time, they need to be gone. Or maybe somebody takes an extended leave because they have a family member they have to care for. They have a work comp related issue they're recovering from. Those are other types of things that could come up unexpectedly that you want to be prepared for. Let's start with some general background on sort of two main categories of leave that we see and that we also receive questions from clients regarding. And those would be, okay, what leave that I provide is paid and what leave that I provide is unpaid. So let's kind of provide some broad examples of the different types of leave just to get our minds in the right place. So paid leave could be like vacation. It could be personal time off, sometimes called paid time off or referred to as PTO. Could be sick leave that's either provided by the employer or mandated by the state. There are a number of states and even cities that have paid sick leave law. Similar for a family leave law, there could be a city or state mandatory family leave law that employers have to comply with, or in locations that don't have mandatory laws, an employer might choose to provide paid sick leave. So that's some examples of paid leave. Unpaid leave that we think about, generally speaking, would be leave under the Family and Medical Leave Act. That is not paid leave under the FMLA law. There are some instances where pay might come into play with somebody on FMLA, but the law itself does not mandate pay for an employee when they're out. Similarly, if an employee is provided leave as a reasonable accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, that leave under the ADA itself may not be required to be paid. And generally, another thing that we see for unpaid leave is an employer provided personal leave of absence. That generally occurs if an employer has a policy or practice of giving unpaid time off to employees when they need it that is beyond some other leave program the employer might have, or beyond what a law might provide for. If somebody still needs some time off after they've gone through another leave program, an employer might have a benefit that they provide where they could allow an extended period of personal leave for somebody. And as another part of the overview, what are some other types of employee leave that an employer might see? You could have employees, going out on jury duty, or your state could have a court attendance or witness leave where somebody might have to be gone from work. Voting time off is a form of employee leave that we see quite a bit of. Military leave, that can be an extended situation that employers have to deal with. If somebody is in the National Guard, a reserve of a branch of the military, or is activated to active duty, there could be military leave that could be provided. First responder leave, if you've got somebody who's a volunteer firefighter or a paramedic, there could be some leave that comes up with those workers. A lot of states have bone marrow donation leave as an example, and there's many other types of leaves to consider as well. These are just some examples, and with these leaves shown here, some of them might be paid or some might be unpaid. It just depends. We're going to start our discussion by getting a little more in depth now with paid leave. One of the main forms of paid leave that we see and that we receive questions on, and that employers need to deal with for purposes of planning for their business to operate, is vacation. So we want to also clarify another point here as well. So we're going to differentiate today between vacation and then something we saw on a previous slide, which was PTO. And PTO sometimes is called paid time off. PTO is sometimes called personal time off. But we're going to make a distinction with that. Vacation, as we're going to refer to that today, is strictly a voluntary employer provided benefit for someone to take time away from work. That's vacation. PTO, which we'll discuss further, but under the framework of this presentation, PTO is a combination of vacation provided by the employer plus sick time. So that would be sometimes referred to as just, they have an employer has just a one paid time off policy, that sort of thing. We're going to separate vacation from PTO. We'll get more into detail on that later. So with vacation, that's a benefit that employers offer to employees, voluntary, and it allows employees to take time off for travel, other activities where they just want some time away from work. As you see here on the screen, it's not mandatory. An employer isn't generally required to offer vacation time. There are exceptions, however. There's a couple areas, we'll talk about this, that have paid time off for any reason law. So in some places, instead of having like a paid sick leave law, for example, in Nevada, they have a paid time off for any reason law, where an employer has to, by law, provide hours to employees that they can take time off from work with pay. But it's not just for reasons related to sickness. It could be for any reason. But anyway, that's a separate issue. So we're talking about vacation, a voluntary benefit provided by employers that allows employees to take time away from work. Everybody's familiar with vacation, but one thing we do want to mention with this slide is that there can be hidden legal issues for employers that offer a vacation. Things to consider that you maybe don't think about, but you should. And that's part of what we want to talk about today in this, leave management presentation. So if you're offering vacation as an employer, as an employee benefit, you want to absolutely have a written policy of what your vacation offering is. So you want to list who's eligible. So who can participate in the vacation benefit plan? Is it full-time employees only, or part-time employees? Can they participate too? Or is there a certain length of time that somebody must be employed? Are you employed for 90 days before you can use vacation? Is it 1 year? You want to have the eligibility requirements set out in your written policy. You want to have information on accrual. How much time accrues for vacation for an employee? Is it based on hours worked? Is it based per week or is it per pay period, for example? Or instead of accruing vacation, is it front loaded? For example, do you have a vacation policy where on January 1, an employer or an employee gets their vacation allotment fully loaded on January 1st of the year? Are you front loading? Are there times that vacation doesn't accrue? You want to address that in your policy. For example, if somebody's on FMLA leave, they're not working. Do your vacation accruals stop at that point? That's something that you'd want to address in your policy. You'd also want to talk about use in your written vacation policy. Are there, for example, blackout periods that your company absolutely does not allow someone to take vacation because that's your busiest or most productive time? Maybe you're very busy depending on your business on certain holidays, like maybe Memorial Day is one of your biggest days of the year, or Labor Day. Maybe you have those blackout dates. You want to list those. You also want to list in your policy your vacation request process. Is it first come, first serve? Is it based on seniority? Do you have the ability to limit requests based on business needs? Those are important things that you'd want to address in your policy. You'd also want to note in your vacation policy certain types of time off that would not fall under vacation. So parental leave, there wouldn't be a crossover with vacation there. You'd want to list that. Military service leave, you wouldn't want to have a crossover with vacation. Jury duty, those sorts of things. So it is important to have a written policy for vacation. Another big factor that you want to consider, and this is kind of what we just discussed a moment ago about some of the hidden legal issues that can occur if an employer is offering vacation, is can you have a use it or lose it type of policy based on the state or states where you operate? It depends. Really, that's the answer. In some states, it's fine if the employer's vacation policy specifically states that, you know, this is what happens if you don't use your vacation time. So like Florida, Maryland, you could have a use it or lose it policy. In other states, however, once somebody has been awarded vacation, like by front loading, or they've accrued it through your accrual process, then that time can't be forfeited. So examples of those states would be California, Nebraska. Those are states where once an employee has vacation time, an employer can't say, well, it's use it or lose it. Once they have it there. As a workaround to those states where you can't have use it or lose it, a lot of employers put a cap on the maximum accrual amount of vacation that an employee can get. And then once an employee reaches that cap, vacation accruals stop. Accruals would only resume after some vacation time is used. So even if you can't have use it or lose it, you could consider having a maximum accrual cap. The state laws we just mentioned is going to control vacation rules, you know, a voluntary time off policy offered by the employer, vacation. Those rules are going to be covered by state law. They're not going to be covered by federal law. If you are a multi-state employer, you want to be very careful. It could be difficult to have one vacation policy for all of your employees if you're a multi-state employer. The reasons are, as noted here, if you're operating in a state that prohibits use it or lose it policies and your multi-state vacation policy said, yeah, it's all use it or lose it, that's not going to work. So you're going to want to make sure that whatever policy you have, or if you have separate policies for employees, depending on the state where they work, whatever you're doing, you want to make sure that that's going to be compliant. Another big and sometimes sort of hidden legal issue that can come up with an employer who voluntarily offers vacation time to employees is that time when somebody leaves required to be paid out to the employee? Again, the answer is, and I know this is frustrating, but it's true. Again, it depends. That's a pretty common answer in legal situations, but it is especially true here because it does depend. yes, a payout must occur if it's required by state law. You know, as we just discussed, some states don't allow forfeiture of accrued unused vacation time. So like, for example, if you're in California, if an employee leaves employment, that vacation time must be included in their final pay. And yes, also a payout must occur if the employer's written vacation policy requires it. So some employers may be in a state that doesn't require payout, but they might say, hey, we're just trying to be nice to people and our policy says we pay it out, so we pay it out. In that case, you'd have to pay it out if your policy says so, even if it's not required by law. Or if you have a standard practice, if your policy is silent on that issue, if you have a standard practice of paying out vacation at termination for employees, you've got to follow that. If you don't follow that standard practice, even if it's not written down with payout, you're going to have an issue, because if somebody is treated differently, they could potentially make a claim against your business to a state agency. So that's something that you gotta watch for. You don't want a discrimination claim or retaliation claim because you are paying out vacation voluntarily to some departing employees, but not all of them. Another big paid area leave that we see very frequently and that can affect your business when you're trying to manage your leave for employees, paid sick leave. Now, this is, again, we touched on this earlier, but this is something that could be offered voluntarily by an employer. If you're in a state that doesn't require paid sick leave, you might offer it as an employee benefit for employee morale, employee retention, employee recruitment. You could say, hey, you know, we're in South Dakota, we're not required to have paid sick leave, but we do offer that time for employees. I mean, that's something that could happen. Or what we see very frequently, and it's getting more and more frequently, is there could be a city or state where you operate that mandates by law that employers have to provide paid sick leave to their employees. And if you're in one of these places that has a mandatory paid sick leave law, those laws are very, very strict in terms of what are the rules for eligibility, how do you accrue, what employee notice has to be provided, what employer notice has to be provided, what can it be used for. If there's a paid sick leave law in a location where you're operating, they're generally very, very strict, and the policies or the penalties for not following them are severe. So that's an important thing to consider. And when we're talking about paid sick leave, we're generally looking at laws or policies provided by an employer that an employee can take care of themselves if they're sick, or care for a family member. If there's a school closing, if there's a medical appointment, or if there's domestic violence situations, that's generally what paid sick leave applies to. Paid family leave, that's a similar situation. We have some clients that are in non-paid family leave states. However, they do offer voluntarily paid family leave, again, as an employee benefit to attract employees, retain them, employee morale. However, we're seeing more and more states, kind of like with paid sick leave, that are mandating now paid family leave laws. Again, that's something that you've got to be really, really careful with in terms of eligibility, use, how much time, all that stuff. If you're under the jurisdiction of a paid family leave law, you've got to be really careful with it. And generally those laws relate to an employee who's pregnant, an employee who is going to give birth or who has given birth, or then an employee who's a parent of a child for baby bonding time. So that's what we see a lot of with paid family leave. Now let's talk about that distinction we mentioned before and some of the issues you want to consider if you are a company that offers PTO. So that again can be personal time off or paid time off. Those are kind of interchangeable, but you end up with the acronym of PTO. Generally, it's a combination of vacation time off and sick time off. So that means if you're an employer that's offering PTO, your thought behind that program generally is, I don't want to have a vacation policy and I don't want to have a sick policy. I just want to have one block of time that people can use for any reason at all. That's what you think of as PTO. Generally, if you're an employer and you're offering PTO and you're in a location that's not subject to a city or state paid sick leave law, you just got one chunk of time, you're going to call it PTO, you want to offer it, great. There are generally not a ton of issues that you'll run into. There's some general things as we sort of talked about, but it's not as much of a concern. However, as noted, if you're in a city or state that has a mandatory paid sick leave law, and you want to offer PTO, again, a combination of vacation and sick leave, it's going to be much more complex if you're in one of those paid sick leave law locations. There's going to be many compliance obligations that you've got to consider so that you're not running afoul of the paid sick leave law and then incurring nasty penalties against your business. So one of the things to think about if you're offering PTO, that one block of time off for any reason, in a city or state with a mandatory paid sick leave law, here are some important factors to consider. You can generally have a PTO policy in those places. You know, you can combine your vacation and the required sick time into one PTO policy, generally speaking, in a city or state with a paid sick leave law. But you should always check to make sure before you do that combo policy. However, as we just mentioned, the rules are extremely strict. Paid sick leave laws greatly favor the employee over the employer. So if you are an employer and you want to have that one policy for vacation and sick time, and you're in one of those paid sick leave jurisdictions, you've got to follow the exact requirements of the paid sick leave law with your PTO policy. So in other words, who's covered? What are the accruals? Is front loading allowed? What are the reasons for use? Is there payout at termination? And regarding payout, it might be required if a vacation component is part of your PTO policy. If you had a separate vacation policy and a separate sick leave policy, in many cases, with a separate sick leave policy and somebody leaves, any hours are not required to be paid out under a sick leave policy. But if you combine sick and vacation into a PTO policy, somebody leaves and they're in a state that has a requirement of vacation payout, well, all that sick time you lumped in's got to get paid out too, because it's going to be considered vacation if you have a PTO policy. Just something to consider. If you have a PTO policy and you're in a mandatory paid sick leave location, another thing to think about is your policy language. Your PTO policy is basically going to start off as a paid sick leave policy. You're going to have a compliant paid sick leave policy if you don't want to get dinged by the city or state where you're operating in. You're going to start with a paid sick leave policy as your PTO policy, but then you would add language within that framework of the paid sick leave law policy. You'd add language for, oh, you can also use it for vacation or personal time off. You just want to make sure that you're starting with those reasons for use that cover the paid sick leave law. And with the PTO policy, combining again vacation and sick leave in a location that requires paid sick leave, you're still going to have to follow all of the paid sick leave law rules at a minimum. So if an issue comes up with PTO, whether or not you followed your paid sick leave law in your location will be the first thing a government investigator would look at, or a private plaintiff's attorney, even if it's for a vacation related question by an employee. If you're in a PSL location, you've got a PTO policy, the first thing that's going to be looked at is, oh, PTO policy, did you follow the paid sick leave law with your rules and everything? That's an important thing to consider. If you're in a paid sick leave location and you're combining vacation and paid sick leave into a PTO policy, you're going to have a heightened compliance risk. You're going to have to make sure, again, that all the paid sick leave rules are followed. You're not going to be able to take an adverse employment action against an employee who requests certain accommodations based on the paid sick leave rules. That's going to set your business up for a claim. And it can be a real big challenge to have one PTO policy if you're a multi-state employer and some of your locations have a paid sick leave law. It is very, very tough to have a one-size-fits-all policy for vacation and sick time that's combined into a PTO policy if one or more of your locations has a paid sick leave law. The paid sick leave laws are detailed and they vary from state to state and city to city. You've got to comply with each paid sick leave law exactly. In other words, you can't pick one necessarily and just stick to that with your PTO policy, because there could be another state that you're covering with your policy that could have a different rule. And this stuff gets very technical, and the people enforcing those PSL laws are super detail oriented. So that's something that you've got to comply with exactly, or else. So what are some potential solutions for a PTO policy risk if you don't want to take on that risk of a combined vacation and sick leave policy, especially if you're in a location that has a paid sick leave law? So what are some of the possible solutions? Well, one is to just have separate policies. Don't have a PTO policy. If you're in a location with a paid sick leave law, have a vacation policy. That's one chunk of time off. That's your own policy that you create. It's in one bucket that's over here. And then have a separate time off policy for paid sick leave that's mandated by the city or state government. That's in a different bucket that's over there. That's a separate chunk of time. It's a separate policy. You follow that policy exactly when somebody's sick or using something that's covered under the paid sick leave law. That's just one separate area that you keep an eye on its own. And then over again on the other side is vacation, which is your own policy. Then if you're not mixing the two together, you're going to have much less complex administration, and you're going to reduce your chances for a very costly misstep that some employers could run into if they have a combined vacation and sick policy. And that's especially true if you're a multi-location employer and you've got more than one paid sick leave law that you've got to comply with. Let's talk about unpaid leave now. One of the biggest forms of unpaid leave that's legally mandated that we see is Family Medical Leave Act leave. Just a quick refresher on FMLA. It's a federal law applying to employers with 50 or more employees. It's an unpaid leave for employees or family member illness, medical treatment, some other reasons. There could be a state law that might be in play. And depending on what state or states you operate in, there could be a required paid leave time that could overlap with FMLA. So if you're in a paid sick leave law or paid family leave law state, depending on what type of leave somebody's taking, for example, maybe somebody just had a baby and they want to have 6 weeks off, you could be in a situation where the federal Family Medical Leave Act leave would apply, as well as perhaps a paid family leave law, depending on what location you're in. They would work together if an employee is taking time off. So what started as an unpaid leave under FMLA could ultimately end up being a paid leave if there's a family leave law in play. Another area where somebody could be on leave under FMLA, where somebody might receive pay, would be if there's a short-term or long-term disability policy benefit that's offered by the employer. Short-term disability and long-term disability are not leave allotments. FMLA is a leave allotment, but STD and LTD are pay replacement benefits. So somebody could be on unpaid FMLA leave as required by law. However, they might get some supplemental payments under a different employee benefit. But generally speaking, FMLA is unpaid leave. Another big form of unpaid leave is leave as a reasonable accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. That's a federal law that covers employers of 15 or more employees. There could also be a state law that's like the ADA that could be in play. For example, in Minnesota, the Minnesota Human Rights Act provides for reasonable accommodation for disabled employees, and that covers employers with 1 or more employees. So it's not the federal threshold of 15. Depends on the state law. Also, there could be some other laws that could come into play where pay could kick in. Again, it could be a paid family leave law, it could be a paid sick leave law. But generally speaking, if somebody's offered leave under the ADA as a reasonable accommodation, the ADA itself does not require that that leave be paid. Another form of unpaid leave that we see, and we talked about this very briefly in the intro, is a personal leave of absence. That can be an employer policy. An employer might voluntarily offer a personal leave of absence to employees in certain circumstances. Where we generally see that is when no other leave law or program applies, or an employee has exhausted other required forms of leave, but they need more time off. If you offer personal leaves of absence as an employer, unpaid personal leaves of absences, be sure that they're offered consistently to similarly situated employees, and also be sure that you're fairly administering them. You want to make sure if you're going to do this, offer this unpaid personal leave to individuals when they need it, that you treat everybody who's in a similar position in the same way. If you single people out for better or worse treatment, that opens up your company to discrimination or retaliation claims. Another issue relating to leave that can come into play are unexpected call-outs by employees. So what do you do if an employee calls off for just one day or just one shift? First off, you want to have a written attendance policy in place, required notice time. If they know in advance how much notice do they have to give you, how to provide your notice. You want to follow your policy. Again, you want to enforce things consistently. You want to also think about, depending on the size of your business, sort of have a contingent staffing idea in the back of your mind. What am I going to do outside of the longer time off of leave that somebody might have for a vacation or like a medical situation? What if it's just a shorter time, one day, a couple days, or somebody's out? Have in your mind alternatives for how to fulfill your staffing needs for the day or for a couple days if somebody's calling off. That's just something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is if there's a call off for just one day or one shift or a couple days, is okay, this person is called out. I'm located in a city or state that has a paid sick leave law. What are my requirements there? There are some situations where you have to follow the paid sick leave law if somebody calls in sick, in terms of when can you ask for documentation from an employee, what uses of leave are permitted. If you're in a location with a paid sick leave law, you got to be very careful with how you handle a call off, even if it's just for one day or even if it's just for one shift, if the reason for the call off could be something that's covered under that paid sick leave law. Let's talk about managing time off. What are some of the best practices that you as an employer want to consider just to make sure that your business is in good shape? This is sort of a recurring theme with us, but we hit it for a reason because it's super important, and doing it, this first one, can really help your business, and that is to have written policies. Have a policy for vacation. If you combine vacation with sick time, have a PTO policy. If you're subject to a paid sick leave law or paid family leave law, have those policies in place too. Have an attendance policy. Again, when does somebody have to call in? What form of notice do they have to give you? Those are important things to do. With your written policies, you want to make sure that they comply with state law. You don't want them to run afoul of any rules that could be lurking out there, like with vacation, the use it or lose it rules, the payout at termination rules. You want to be very careful that any written policy that you have is compliant. That's something that we do every day, and that's something that we can help you with if you're a client, but just have that in your mind as you're kind of planning for how you want to deal with when employees are gone. Same with paid sick leave laws, as we've sort of been emphasizing here. That is a very compliance heavy area for an employer. If you're in a location with a paid sick leave law, there are so many rules to follow. You don't want to make a mistake because that opens you up to significant liability. So you want to make sure that your written policy is compliant. Once you have those compliant policies in place, this might sound self-evident, but follow them. You want to make sure you're following your policies, eligibility, accrual, use, when people can request time off, how they should request time off. You also want to make sure that your managers and supervisors who are handling requests or enforcing the rules know what your policies are. They have to be familiar. They are your first line of defense with employee interaction and also implementing your policies. You don't want those individuals making a misstep that's going to end up costing your business. Be consistent. I mean, this is one of the broad themes that you will hear from us if you listen to our presentations. Is consistency is super important. You got to treat similarly situated employees in the same manner. If somebody runs afoul of a policy and you're looking at some sort of employee discipline or other adverse employment action, you got to make sure that it's applied equally. Again, don't single out somebody for better or worse treatment if it's an issue that a similar employee had previously. You've got to remain consistent with how you handle situations with employees, particularly relating to leave things. Again, as much as you can, be proactive, plan ahead. Have a within your policies a notice requirement if somebody's going to take vacation. You got to tell us, 6 weeks in advance if you're going to be gone for more than 5 business days, that sort of thing. Be proactive with that so that you can start looking ahead or start thinking about, okay, how am I going to cover these shifts? Or somebody's going out for 2 weeks, they're having an operation, they need 2 weeks off to recover. Keep in mind, how am I going to get coverage for this person while they're out? And what short-term contingent scheduling can I do if needed, if there's something even shorter that comes up, a call off for a day, something like that. You want to just have overall, what can I do when somebody's gone? Another important thing is to get your payroll provider on board. A lot of payroll providers could potentially assist with leave tracking, accrual calculations for vacation, for paid sick leave. Those are the sorts of things that should be built into their system. If you're using a payroll provider, you want to lean on them to assist you as much as possible with your obligations under the policy in terms of things like use, accrual, those sorts of things. How can we help you with this? Well, generally, ask us. We deal with leave issues basically daily. Attendance issues, we see that every week. Employee leave has turned into such a big thing that we are very familiar with it, and it's something that we monitor. We stay on top of changes, and we're ready to assist our clients when they ask us a question through the portal on what's going on with the leave issue. If you're not subscribing to our weekly newsletter, I suggest that you do so. We provide updates weekly on significant employment law topics, and that would include changes to leave laws or new leave laws that come into place, because more and more states and more cities are providing paid leave obligations that employers need to follow. And we can help you when you do run into a kind of a troublesome leave issue or an attendance issue. What does your policy say? What actions can you take? What actions can you not take? Those sorts of things. We're here to assist you with that, and especially if you're a multi-location employer, you really do want to have assistance with getting things put together. You want to make sure you're avoiding costly employee mistakes with leave, so reach out to My HR Counsel when you have any questions, and our information is there. And I think Dan has some final words as well.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And thanks everyone for attending today. Excuse me. The material gave us lots to consider regarding the different types of leave available to employees and the potential legal risks for employers. And then if you have any questions, as Michael said, our clients should open up a ticket in our Ask an Attorney portal. And then if you'd like to learn more information about us, please email us at info@myhrcounsel.com. We hope you have a great rest of the day, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thanks again. Bye now.